right, good evening. Welcome and or welcome back. Those of you who weren't with us last week, tonight is part 2 of our series, The Art of Beauty, how divine beauty manifests in our daily lives. And tonight we're privileged to have Zeke Balin with us. Before I introduce him, I'll take a moment to begin with a prayer, which I neglected to do last week. I'm embarrassed to admit. So let's pray. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Father, we thank you for the gift of this Lenten journey that we're on, for the opportunities that it gives us to grow in relationship with you and to follow your Son more closely. We ask your blessing upon us in these Lenten days, that we would continue to strive for holiness of life. And as we also seek to go deeper in our understanding of your goodness and your beauty, we ask you to be with us tonight and to bless our speaker and his family. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. So we've known Zeke Balin for quite some time. First met him when he was a grad student at Rutgers, living in rather substandard grad student housing, as I recall. Since then, he's gone on to complete not only a Master of Fine Arts degree at Rutgers, but also a Master's in Classical Architecture at the University of Notre Dame. Zeke is a professional architect and visual artist, among other gifts and skills that he has. And so we're blessed that he's come to share with us not only about his work, but just about the vision and the understanding that he has of how the importance of artistic beauty and how it reveals to us the divine. So please welcome Zeke Balin.
Thank you, Father. Thank you also especially to Father Peter Savolka for the invitation, for the years of spiritual direction and friendship. Thank you all for coming. As Father said, I am an architect. I started as a sculptor, an artist. I have been consumed with the idea of beauty and the importance of beauty in my work and in the world, my career. But one thing I don't do is talk about it. So in this wonderfully lit and beautiful room, after I'm sure the dinners that you've all had, I hope I can keep you awake. I'm not a teacher, I'm not a art historian, but as I said, I've been struggling with the idea, the questions of beauty, which we'll raise tonight. I think the most I can do is invite you all into that struggle, maybe make you aware of where you encounter it in your own life. There will be I hope some portion of this talk that is instructive, but I think my goal is that this is more of a meditation on how we encounter beauty in the visual arts and architecture as we make this Lenten journey together. I will just also start by drawing attention to this room. As Winston Churchill said, we shape our buildings and afterwards they shape us. And again, as this building, this beautiful building, this room was conceived originally in the mind of its designer, whether that was the architect, the pastor, a donor, a school principal, and it was brought to life. Architecture, like many of the visual arts, is collaborative. And it was brought to life through the hands of many, many people working together. And it speaks to us now, and it will either elevate what I have to say by its grandeur or diminish it by contrast. So let's begin. I guess I also want to thank Ms. Dalmazio, who, if any of you were here for last week's talk. I was not able to make it. If you were not, I encourage you to go online. The talk is available. She did a great job, and in imitation of her talk, I'm going to start with a couple of questions. What is, just things for you to ponder as we move forward together this evening. What is beauty? What is art and architecture? Why do certain images, scenes, environments evoke an emotional response? Why do certain works of art and architecture remain regarded as beautiful for all of history? And why do certain works fill us with wonder? And then one maybe more personal, what is the most beautiful thing I have seen or I have encountered? And why did I find it beautiful? I have behind me here, who recognizes this painting? Anyone? Raphael's. Do you know this scene? It's a scene from the Bible. The Transfiguration. Just over the weekend, on Sunday, Pope Francis at his Angelus address, commentary address, this was, I believe, was a Sunday's reading, a recent reading, and the scene of the Transfiguration. And Pope Francis actually made reference to this scene and its relationship to beauty. And actually, I was amazed by that, especially days before giving this talk, and how the Transfiguration, what it represents, how it might relate to beauty. I'll just start there and hopefully end there. The one way of interpreting the scene of the Transfiguration is that God reveals to his closest friends, James, Peter, and John, just prior to his journey to Jerusalem for the last time, for his crucifixion, a deeper reality, an underlying reality of who he is, and this in conversing with Moses and Elijah on Mount Tabor. And this is, to some degree, the role of the artist, to bring to life to others the underlying reality of the world around us that God has given us, and make it present, and in so doing, make God present. Whether it's poetry, music, visual arts, architecture, I think if there's 2 points I would like you to walk away from this evening with, I think it's these. One is that all art, and art and architecture as arts, are God's way of wooing us. They are God showing us his love for us. They're enticing us through the beauty that they reveal of who he is. And the second point is that that beauty of who God is exists in a heavenly reality even now. And if it existed at one point prior to the fall in perfection, that moment is past. We live in a fallen world, but it's the same world that will one day in the resurrection be redeemed, and on this we believe. Not that heaven is that our end post-resurrection as resurrected beings is in some other place, but it's in this place, in a glorified state. And the role of the artist then is the role of beauty, and the artist in revealing it points to the ways in which that heavenly reality is present now. And But due to our fallen state, there is this gap. The most beautiful work of art, Krista last week played some beautiful and sung some beautiful pieces of music. They can only ever, as Christopher West used to say, we can't hang our hat on those works of art. They point to a reality beyond themselves. The works themselves will never truly provide satisfaction, but they, and in fact, to attempt to do so is idolatry. But they point to this heavenly reality, and so in such a way, they fill a gap between the imperfect and the perfect. And we'll see that especially in great works of architecture and works of art. So I'm actually going to start, move from here, I think, to a clip to begin this discussion. And as soon as I'm finished, I would like to hear from you, as we watch this clip, what is the role of art in this scene? And we'll discuss it briefly. See if I can stop. Unfortunately, we don't have sound, but I don't think it'll be necessary. Okay, so we've gone from Raphael's Transfiguration to How to Train Your Dragon. I hope you can see this. Can anyone just shout out, what did you see, what did the role that art played in this scene? There was, may have been difficult to see up here, if so. The scene is a boy encountering a dragon. The dragon has been wounded and cannot fly. The boy, struck with wonder at encountering this dragon, pulls out his sketchbook and draws it. And he instinctively draws it as it should be, with bilateral symmetry. You can see that there. And only later continues to observe the dragon even in this short scene and notices that it's missing part of its tail fin, and he erases it. And the backstory to this movie, if you don't know it, it's not a great work of art. I wouldn't say, as a father, I would tell you to do the research before you show it to your children. But there is a profound truth that so often, even in any story, the boy is the lame boy in his village. His village exists in an area where there are dangerous dragons. And the people have studied them and learned that they have to kill them. And this boy is not a strong warrior. His father is the chief. He cannot accomplish, he doesn't fit into this society. In fact, he prefers study and invention, engineering. Those are his strengths, which are seen as weaknesses in this community. But as an artist, as an inventor, he is driven to discovery. And he seeks out this wounded dragon, which was hit with a recent battle, and encounters. The arc of the movie is that he uses this talent in discovering that the dragon is wounded to restore and build a prosthetic tailpiece, which restores the dragon to flight, and then taming the dragon through his invention, he is eventually able to lead the village to live in harmony with these creatures, with nature, with these creatures that up until that point have been their enemies. And this is the same thing that I think God's intends for us in beauty, in the visual arts, that the arts are meant to make us live in nature, to be at home in our environment. By filling that gap between our fallen nature and pointing towards the perfected reality, they're God's way of reassuring us that, in fact, this is our home and that He loves us. And how do artists do that? So in the movie, what is he doing? He's not, the drawing is not self-expression. He is studying from nature. So for the Renaissance artists would, for example, in Leon Battista Alberti's 10 Books in Architecture, it's one of the first instances of treatise on art addressing how there is the term he uses is consinity, or consinitas. And it's this consinity is the tendency in nature towards perfection. So we don't find perfection in nature, but we find a tendency towards perfection in nature. We find it in the geometry of natural forms. We find it in tripartite structures. The human body, we find it in our top, middle, and base. We find it in the top, middle, and base of trees, of bifurcation in vegetation, not that our buildings should look like plants or animals, as some more modern architects have endeavored to do, but that there is an order in nature, which actually we can derive, and you can look around the room and see it here. So this rectangular room was given a even spacing of bays, of columns, which align with the beams. There is, whether or not these are structural, they are conveying and interpreting a tectonic force to make us all feel safe to be in here, to feel that there is an order in some way. Even a room like this represents an image of the universe that is ordered, that has a beginning, the entrance doors, a middle, and an end. Not unlike a Catholic church, narthex, with a progression, beginning, a middle, and end. And then again, the room, even the wall structure, a top, a middle, and a base. This is to say that our greatest works of art are elements of where we might most encounter the perfection that God intends for us, but that order etymologically is connected to the word for ordinary. And we tend to not think of art and beauty as something that is ordinary. Today we tend to think of the ordinary as commonplace, but if we're all, as is the case, intended by God to live lives of holiness, to be able to achieve sanctity, then beauty must not only be something that is rarely encountered in great works of art. It has to be something that we can encounter in an ordinary way on a day-to-day basis. God has provided that creation through the natural world. The artists and architects, in imitation of that order of natural beauty, make it evident and can bring it into our lives on a daily basis. On this topic of ordinariness, I want to give you a little bit of background on how we got to. Well, I guess let me start with another point. How do we know that beauty is something that is universally accessible? I guess the elephant in the room in any conversation about visual beauty especially is subjectivity. So beauty is in the eye of the beholder is a phrase we often hear. The philosophers, especially in the modern era, dismissed the idea of objective beauty, that subjectivity, that taste. Ultimately, one cannot argue with a feeling, and so if I feel something is beautiful and you don't, we're at an impasse. As we know, in fact, beauty is, if it's a transcendental, if it is an element of God, then of course it's objective. However, it can't be that simple principles of beauty are well, let's say they're rationally known. As I said, I'm inviting you into the struggle. Let me talk to you about how I've done this in my work. I often chew on the aspects of the philosophy, the theory, but I think seeing it in a project So this little floor plan is a project I'm working on now. It will be the first perpetual adoration chapel in Manhattan ever, history of the city. It's 500 square feet, probably a quarter of the size of this room, but it will be open and accessible for Eucharistic adoration 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The room is in the basement of a rectory at St. Joseph's Parish in Greenwich Village. If you're familiar with that part of Manhattan, Greenwich Village, at least for the past 50 years or so, it has been it's in the neighborhood of New York University, but it's associated with a very bohemian culture. The streets are often, especially in the last 20 years, let's say difficult to make a publicly accessible building due to homelessness and a lot of drug use in the neighborhood. In spite of this, the Dominican friars who run the parish were committed to open this project. However, one of the first difficulties they encountered was not just building access, but having our Lord present in a monstrance 24 hours a day, the security would be an immediate concern. This is a rendering for the project. We went back and forth early on how we could address security, and actually looking from nature, looking at historic precedent. We came upon the idea of introducing a rood screen. So this wooden, essentially in the Greek tradition, it would be an iconostasis. It's actually a part of the Roman tradition as well. Prior to the Reformation, the Roman churches in the West most commonly had full-height screens. Later, what they were often left with were altar rails. My little understanding of history is that the removal of the rood screens was a big part of initially the English Reformation, and then which spread throughout most of the rest of Europe, to the point that it's very rare to find a church today in the West with such a screen. However, it provides the perfect ability to provide some secure access for protection of the monstrance at a Perpetual Adoration Chapel in Manhattan. What it also does is express symbolically the heavenly veil between the sanctuary and what would be the nave of this small space. Excuse me. If I go back to the floor plan, you'll see that that rood screen is here. The sanctuary at the top, small amount of seating in the what would be the nave, and the room itself, the basement of the rectory, partial height basement. So we do have natural light along 6th Avenue, but as we encounter the room from the start, you get a little bit of a sense of it here. It was actually not a rectangular space. It was no corner in the room was 90 degrees. It was trapezoidal. That's the way the street grid is laid out in that part of New York. So the role of the architect then is to take this less than perfect reality, and especially for a worship space, to try to order it in such a way that it expresses a universe that is beautiful, that is reasonable, rational. The Dominican friar here, the pastor of the parish, really wanted the chapel to be Romanesque. Romanesque architecture from the period, essentially from the late Roman Empire, post-Roman, prior to the Renaissance, sort of the Southern Gothic, also prior to the Gothic, birth of Gothic architecture in Northern Europe. But it is a language of architecture that is a little bit not fully developed. It was fully developed in the Renaissance with the rebirth of classicism, and so what we did is a kind of elevated Romanesque or simplified classical. But starting with, just as you see in this room, starting with a series of pilasters. It's an engaged column along the wall that provides a rhythm, it provides a proportion, it indicates the transferal of forces tectonically, physically, expressing the reality of what the building is doing. Within the sanctuary, so part of that, not unrelated to music, the even spacing of center lines between columns Here, the corner is corners are a classical problem of classical architecture and how they are expressed, because what is a full column to support you even see it here in the back, and maybe here as well, where the width of the pilaster is cut in half to receive to engage the wall. There is a progression of materials, another component of architectural expression from nature. It recognizes a hierarchy. In a worship space, we would put the most elevated materials at the altar. So we have here the white marble aedicule or reredos with the image of the Divine Mercy, which was the dedication for the chapel. An engaged altar of repose for the monstrance. The windows, which in the 6th Avenue existing windows of the room were, as you can see in the plan here, 2 different sizes and not centered in the space. And a false wall was built in front of it's not a false wall, an additional wall was built in front of the existing wall with new openings that would receive the natural light from the existing openings on the street, but within an ordered system, centered in the openings of the pilasters. I think a part of good church design is to see that take the altar as the source from which the rest of the building is ordered, because this represents a reality of our faith, that the order is derived from God. And as most elevated, the altar of repose, the white marble half-round columns, and then transferring to a planar column at the engaged pilasters, which also transfers transfers from the white marble to travertine stone. The pastor had chosen these texts from the Song of Songs because of the long-standing character in the neighborhood surrounding, which he believed was offers a vision of love that is not based in our faith, a vision of love that is self-centered, and so the Latin "Fortis est mors delectio," love is strong as death. He wanted to make sure that to associate the sacrifice of the altar, the Eucharist, with a love that is more truly expressed. Here again in the 3D rendering, much of that is visible, especially at the front, where at the one step up for the sanctuary provides also a kneeler. The rood screen itself, carved wood, is also an elevation. So while the pilasters around the room form a datum of this kind of heavenly order, marching with a pace and rhythm around the room, that's broken and elevated with the Corinthian order at the rood screen. And then carvings, organic and of cherubim, also the rood itself, the cross, Dominican cross. So then the project is currently under construction. It's nearing completion. I have some images of some more selective, some more revealing of the current state. the travertine stone walls, the Doric travertine capitals, the stained wood entablature, which again forms a unifying band around the room, which is only broken to move in progression from wood to travertine to then the marble over the altar. Here's showing more of the raw conditions as of a couple weeks ago, even the difference between the two. You get a sense of some of the window. Natural light will be coming through. It will be augmented by some electrical light if it's necessary. The unfinished entablature, the again elevation of the stone, even the flooring and the sanctuary becomes more elevated. Choir stalls were existing. In addition to adoration, this sanctuary is also the place where the friars will pray the hours throughout the day. Another advantage of the rood screen was that they wanted to be able to leave the breviaries and books in the chapel unmolested throughout the day, throughout the week. It's another aspect that rood screen provides. And then if you can see these in any detail, the progress, the rood screen is just about complete. It will be shipped at the end of this month, installed thereafter, and this is, this is it without the final stain and varnish. I'll try to zoom in. So you see the carved six-winged seraphs, the organic tracery, the Corinthian columns, the rood or the cross itself, and then also this progression in the ironwork from the outside, from the flanking sides to the center. The fleur-de-lis as another organic form, also representative of Our Lady, and even the progression in the center where the fleur-de-lis becomes fully blossomed. So let me tie this back to, if I can, this the Transfiguration. So what I attempted to do in that chapel was take the given conditions. This trapezoidal room, a set of windows facing the street that could not be altered. The building is a landmark building. We can't change the exterior windows. The location of the sanctuary to define the room, to begin to give the room order that is expressive of a reality that is perfect. Though even in the work that we did in the chapel, again, elements, the corners, some of the windows, the ceiling height, there are things we would have loved to have done to be more expressive, to elevate and give more honor to God and evoke more of a sense of wonder in the worshiper, in the visitor. But there's only so much that we could do. I think I'll just draw one other point of attention in Raphael's scene of the Transfiguration. And that is that one of his innovations in this work of art is to depict the scene with the transfiguration happening as we know it, and the scene that occurs immediately afterwards in the Gospel in Matthew, where after this amazing scene on Mount Tabor, the apostles descend and encounter the rest of the other 9, who and a boy who is possessed. And the parents of the boy tell our Lord that they ask him if he can cure their son. And the apostles respond and say that they tried, but they couldn't do it. And that's what's happening here in this scene. You have the 9 apostles on the lower left, all in various states of confusion as a group. The somewhat maybe irate or disbelief villagers, the family of the boy, and then in this serene scene above, this perfected reality of the transfiguration. And I think that I use this image because I think it's very expressive of a reality that we can all relate to. That almost, how is it that such beauty can exist in the world, and at the same time, even at the moment where Christ is revealing himself, the remaining 9 of his apostles can't cast out this demon from this boy. The beauty doesn't exist for its own sake in this life, but points toward a heavenly reality, and I guess it's I think of it as a negotiation almost, that idea of filling the gap between fallen nature and the perfection that God has in store for us. That the best we can achieve is a kind of negotiation with our environment, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be attempted. And the great works of art are often able to take us away from, even temporarily remove us from this self-awareness of the reality of the fallenness of the world around us. But often, even so, they themselves are negotiations with the rules of physics, with the rules of the laws of nature. But even in the ordinary works, in our homes, in our offices, in our dress, there are visual expressions of this. There are opportunities to visually express this heavenly reality by making the attempt, understanding that we do live in an imperfect world, but to not strive to beautify it, even in commonplace and ordinary situations, falls short of the charge that God has given us as Christians. So I'll end there. Thank you for making this, for joining me in this struggle that I have with this important theme. I'm happy to take any questions or participate in discussion on either the chapel itself, other works of art, or any aspect of the talk I've given this evening. But thank you for coming out.
We don't have a second microphone tonight, so if you have a question, you'll have to speak up so everybody can hear you. I'll try to kind of moderate that a little bit from here. Okay, you're first.
I have a question about the screen, and you have the openings for the window effect. Besides the ironwork, will there be glass there as further protection for the monstrance?
Great question. Initially, before we came to the root screen as a concept, we were looking at, there was a progression. So initially, we wanted the monstrance on an open altar in the room. As we continued to meet with the Archdiocese and even security consultants, we said, well, this is not acceptable. So I think what most of us think of and have seen in terms of safety and security that allows visibility is plate glass, sheets of glass. And in fact, there was not long ago, there was a sculpture of the Sacred Heart on 34th Street that was enclosed in a rectangular glass structure. It had been placed out on the sidewalk in front of the church, and I think it had gotten graffitied at one point, and so they cleaned the graffiti and encased it in glass. And it was the oddest thing to see this sculpture with a glass enclosure around it. And so we really didn't want to see a monstrance with a glass enclosure around it. And even the idea of a kind of plate glass wall separating would provide complete visibility, but we felt it would look like a zoo or a museum. And so, again, looking from within the tradition of the church, actually the next step was an altar rail with perhaps partial glass, but aesthetically we just felt that this was the intrusion of that kind of plate glass. I guess another way to come at it is that everything in the built environment is that there's a language to the visual. I think about this with my kids when we're talking about modesty in our dress, that our clothes speak about who we are and about the context we're in. It's just as true for we have relationships with certain materials, certain colors, and the use of plate glass at this point in our in history predominantly speaks to some other experience other than framing, though it does provide views. We just didn't feel that it was appropriate, and so there will not be glass within those openings. And that was part of the decision that was made was, look, if someone really wanted to, they could climb over the iron grate and attempt to get the monstrance. But we do have, there are cameras and there's an alarm system. So without providing any visual obstruction, and in fact, the use of those three arches in the root screen and then the two side openings, the three arches all line up symmetrically, directly with the center one with the arched mosaic and the monstrance, and then the side ones with the windows. So again, we're trying to express that, even use that screen as an expression of the order of the room. Thank you.
In the shrine as well, the painting behind the monstrance, did you use other paintings or artists for inspiration for that, or the details on the screen itself?
Yeah, thank you. The picture of our Lord?
Yes.
So that was initially the first donor for the chapel wanted it to be dedicated to the Divine Mercy, and there was some back and forth on should it be an icon, a painted icon, or a mosaic, and then also the image itself, an original work of art or a imitation, an attempt at a direct copy of one of the kind of more historical approved images of Divine Mercy. There are two. There was, and I'm afraid I can't tell you the names of the artists. There's one which I think is more popularly known, which is actually not the original work of art that Sister commissioned, or had the original artist to do the work. In more recent years, that work has become more popular. That was the artwork that was chosen for this mosaic, and then it's finding a mosaic artist who can imitate it well. But does that answer your question?
Yeah, it reminded me of Hagia Sophia, the mosaics of the ceiling there in Istanbul.
We sent images of that image of Hagia Sophia to the artist. There was the choice to do the background in gold is one innovation of this piece, which is taken from Hagia Sophia. We felt that with the candles on the altar, a mosaic would provide more atmosphere, be more beautiful than just the icon. And I believe the Hagia Sophia mosaic is the image of our Lord is 12 feet tall. It's large. This will be life size. It's about 3 feet wide by about maybe 4 to 5 feet tall. All in all, it's a very small space, but not inappropriate for an adoration chapel, but a surprise that it will be the only adoration chapel in all of New York City. So, I should say in Manhattan. There is one in the Bronx. Thank you. I would almost want to start asking some questions of you all. One of the things the elephant in the room with beauty is, I sometimes like to joke with my kids that, in our Father's house there are many rooms and there's an elephant in each one. It's an odd transcendental, it's an odd quality, beauty. We teach our children to be truthful, we teach them to be good. Do we teach them to be beautiful? And how would we do that? There's this tension we have with, I think a lot of it comes from our own self-consciousness as visual beings, as awareness of our appearance. This tension between beauty, physical beauty, the beauty of material goods, and then the knowledge, as Pope Francis was saying in his audience, that actually we're all made in the image and likeness of God. How do we resolve this tension that we have inherent attractions, let's say, to certain people, certain places because of their appearance, and yet Christ became incarnate and chose to be identified with the reject. I don't have an answer for that, but it strikes me that many have said, right, that the corruption of the greatest is the worst, and that the devil is going to come for the thing that come at the place and corrupt some of the things that are the most true, or maybe the intended to be great vehicles for goodness. And I think, as Krista mentioned last week, the quote from Dostoevsky, "Beauty will save the world." I absolutely think that we're so screwed up on beauty. We have such a hard time with this concept because it's so good, because it will save the world. And I guess there's one thing I would stress on it again is that, and question you all about, is that, but we should support the arts. That these moments of great works of art, great music, great works of architecture or art, we celebrate them, of course, but they have to be accessible to the rest of us. If those images of, if the artists and the architects, and the musicians, and who made these great works are the heroes of the arts, what about the rest of us? We're all called to make our lives beautiful, to express beauty in our homes, in our lives, and we're not all heroes. And I think it would be wrong to say, well, all these things are equally beautiful. We have to come to a place where we can recognize virtuosity and set it apart as heroic, and not let that diminish our own efforts to make our homes beautiful. Roger Scruton, in a talk he gave on beauty of the sacred, mentions, points out children setting the table as a way that beauty can be brought into the home. Setting the table as almost a liturgical act, but it can be done where you can not set the table, you can throw the food down in front of someone, or you can, with care, try to make the table beautiful. Each place setting, the table as a whole. I think one place where we understand this a little better is in decorating for holidays. We intuitively understand that this thing we should make our home beautiful around Christmas or Easter. But I would say that is a way that God has implanted in us this enticement to know Him and love Him, and a way that He expresses His love for us. But I won't ask you all now to share. Yes, please.
Yes, I want to thank you for at least bringing some beauty to 500 square feet, a place with a lot of despair. So hopefully that's a great gift that you provided. My question is a little different, and you're talking about having heroes. Since you came through Notre Dame, which at one time was a great Catholic school, I'm not sure you could better answer than I could if it is now. But the fact is that what is coming out, and I think the Prince, he was a prince at that time, Charles, in England, 1984, brought out the big question about the future of architect, which caused an aflame around the world as far as how we define it. And my question to you is, now that we have these going to college, are they being forced to think in a certain way for the secular world more than the sacred world, and avoid the virtues of humility and honesty and the other virtues when they do, as you mentioned, have these designs before them? Because what we now have is, and again, you can answer this, in the universities, I did talk to some architects who were told if you go to the traditional path, you're just not going to get through. You have to be forced, or to get the grades, you have to talk about a synthetic, modern, secular culture with materials that are no longer, are available, but not go back to traditional design.
Great question. I mean, it's another elephant in the room. Is and I guess I'll try to. I mean, a better speaker would have included that in this talk. But why are we living in a time where the gulf of difference between, we might not all agree on whether we prefer Raphael or Michelangelo or even Monet, but the gulf of difference between what is considered, what's held up in some circles, critics, academics, as to highest to be esteemed, as beautiful, if they'll even use the word. And I mean, so one example of this is in architecture. They'll occasionally do a national survey of what people consider to be beautiful buildings, like of a given year or in all of history. And the uneducated public invariably chooses historic buildings, Gothic, classical, some vernacular building type, and the architecture critics, have to roll their eyes and laugh because of how wrong they are. Because really, the beautiful buildings are the deconstructivist, postmodern, that are the star-architect works of coming out of the universities that you're talking about. I mean, to trace a little bit of it, we're living in a period of doubt. Sculptor Thomas Machiavelli wrote a book called Sculpture in the Age of Doubt, completely from a secular perspective, but he addresses this in detail, tracing it back to the entire modern period. I think you can, and he's not alone in this. Philosophically, I think they would say it begins with Descartes, René Descartes in France. Separating this, I think it's an old heresy, but essentially understanding that the body is subservient, is separate from the mind. This mind-body dualism. I'll try to break this around briefly, but basically the result of that. It took some time. In the early 20th century, you have some of the first instances of the arts being completely nihilistic. A painting of a pipe and the phrase, "this is not a pipe." And somehow this is that the form of a piece was meaningless and the idea was everything. And it got to the point where in the early 20th century, people were selling as works of art, a piece of paper that said "this is art," or Damien Hirst, an ashtray, literally just an ashtray with cigarette butts in it, selling for millions of dollars as a great work of art. How do we get to this gulf between an art that's derived from nature, that points to God, that speaks a language that is universally accessible, and then something so esoteric? So I mean, one tracing of that path it was a rupture. It was a rupture with tradition. It began, I think many people point to Descartes in this separation of the mind and the body, the sense that the formal, the corporal is fungible, it's irrelevant, and really it's entirely the concept which is what makes something beautiful.
Just to follow up on that, in that same talk with the young girls with the 2 dishes, Scruton did mention, and I'm going to throw a curveball at you because he didn't really answer it, about Kincaid versus Van Gogh. If you recall that, where he was saying about defined beauty, and to those, there's more, I guess, Kincaid pictures, 1,001 in the United States considered that beautiful versus the irreverence of Van Gogh. So when you say defining beauty, I think he gave pretty good answers, and I appreciate yours.
If I remember that correctly, yeah, he addressed Thomas Kincaid in addressing that a quality of art, that mass-produced art is inferior to it's kitsch, is inferior. So I think it actually relates to the body again. Why? The answer I would give to that as to why a mass-produced piece of art, which is maybe better than nothing, better than a blank wall, but may also be inferior to your own amateur effort to make a painting or framing your child's drawing, which is maybe not as formally, canonically doesn't. With color, with symmetry, with composition, may be inferior, but why would the handmade be elevated above the mass-produced? That's maybe not a fair summary, but the answer I would give is the incarnation, the Christ, that God took human flesh. It was important that God exists in a singular creation, and actually come into being in much the same way that we all do. And the connection that one has to the human connection, the personal connection, I mean, it's a point I wanted to make with regard to architecture and art as well. we're so used to seeing it on a screen that we come to think that it's almost one and the same. And in fact, if I had a picture of this room up and put it here, it would be an entirely different experience to say that somehow the photo of the room represents the room. Even the Transfiguration, the painting by Raphael, Scruton mentions it in that talk. The way that light, the way that you see the image by reflected light off the painting, meeting your eye. Physically, there's a different thing happening in your eye than the way it's coming projected through the digital screen, a non-reflected image. So, the best I could try to give is something like that. Our art is, it exists in a physical reality, much the same way that we do, and not to be too obsessed about it, but at a certain point, mass production diminishes that human connection. That would be, I guess I would say, why I would advocate the handmade versus the mass-produced. Thank you all.
Again, thank you all for coming out tonight. You certainly don't have to leave right away. There are refreshments in the back corner. I forgot to mention this at the beginning. Restrooms are in that back corner. And we hope that you'll also come back again next week, the third installment of our series, which will be with Eileen Kocha, who is on the faculty of St. Anne Classical Academy. She's had a long career as an educator, and she'll be speaking specifically on the written word, the beauty of literature. And so we look forward to hearing from Eileen next week. So again, please enjoy some refreshments, stick around and mingle and discuss, and yeah.
Can I just say one thing? Like, as you were talking, I got this idea, like the Reformation, during the time period of the Reformation, they destroyed a lot of the visual arts. And what was the church's response? It was growth. And an explosion of art. And I just feel like, I felt in my spirit that, we're in a time of crisis in our church and in our world, that art is going to be leading the way. And I know I'm a visual artist myself, I'm a painter, and I know there's a lot of young people who are attracted to portrait and figurative art and classical art. And just like there's a lot of young people attracted to our traditional Latin Mass. And so I feel like, and I just felt like I wanted to say that or share that.
That's great. It's a great point. We're actually living in some sense a time of doubt, but a time of great hope. And the Chapel Project at St. Joseph's, I've encountered numerous young artists in their young 20s, and they're painting beautiful paintings of the saints, biblical scenes. And don't let anyone tell you. People will go around and say, we've lost the ability to craft like we used to. It's not true. The market doesn't. I think the problem we have to overcome is that the market doesn't support. Economy, modern economics don't support right now that kind of that attention to beauty. But the young people are still drawn to it, and they're doing it regardless. And I agree with you 100%. Absolutely, we're on the cusp of a renaissance.
Good. Thank you so much. Zeke, thank you so much for being with us tonight and sharing, giving us a glimpse inside the mind not only of an architect and an artist, but also a defender of objectivity, which is so much part of our mission as disciples of Jesus today. So, and as a father too, and I wanted to ask you actually about that. How do you you hand this on to your children? This love for beauty, this love for what is objectively real.
Thank you. My wife does a great job. It's I left corporate firms and started my own company because I wanted to be able to share my work with my kids, for me that was the way to do it. And for years now we've had the kids call it daddy drawing time, where maybe in the evening we'll sit down and draw together. And it's funny, I was thinking about this in terms of teaching our children about beauty. My wife will tease me, she's probably scandalized originally, when the kids would come to me with a picture and Dad, look what I drew, and I would critique it. But always, it's I'm half joking. Yes, I love what you drew. I think, I read somewhere years ago that we judge our children's work too much, whether it's a sport they're playing in or something they made. We tell them, it's great, and it may not be that great, but what we should be telling them is the joy that they give us and others by doing that thing. And so, often, first thing is always, I love what you drew. I love that you did that. I love that you filled the whole page. But do you want to get better? They're all amazing. The children are amazing artists. But again, that's also my wife is, who's in the back there, is she comes from actually comes the artist pedigree. Her great grandfather was an architect in New York City who designed dozens of churches. In fact, dozens more outside of New York. Saint Ignatius Loyola on the Upper East Side. The original St. Vincent Ferrer and the rectory that still exists. So it's in the family.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks everybody. Have a good night and get home safe.